The moment Opal Thatcher rode into the dusty town of Redemption, Texas, on a late September morning in 1882, she carried nothing but a worn leather saddlebag, a canteen, and a rifle slung across her back, and every man on the main street stopped what he was doing to stare. She was 24 years old, with dark auburn hair pinned up under a battered hat that had seen better years, and green eyes sharp enough to cut glass. She had the kind of face that made men forget their own names, but the kind of spine that made those same men suddenly remember their manners. She dismounted her roan mare with practiced ease, tied the reins to a hitching post outside the general store, and walked inside without a single glance at the men whose jaws had gone slack. Redemption was a cattle town pressed between two dry ridges in the heart of West Texas, the sort of place that appeared and disappeared from maps depending on who was drawing them. It had a general store, a livery stable, a barber shop that doubled as a dentist's office, a saloon called the Dusty Rose, and a sheriff's office with a rusted lock on the door that had not worked properly since 1879. The population hovered somewhere around 300 souls, and every single one of them was curious about the woman who had ridden in alone. Inside the general store, Opal set her saddlebag on the counter and addressed the shopkeeper, a round-faced man named Herbert Clegg, with quiet directness. "I need hardtack, dried beef, 2 boxes of cartridges for a Winchester, and a good map of the territory between here and the New Mexico border. Whatever you have that is most current." Herbert blinked at her. "You traveling alone, miss?" "That would be why I am purchasing supplies for one person," she said, without unkindness but with absolute clarity. Herbert cleared his throat and began pulling items from the shelves. "Road through the canyon is rough going this time of year," he offered, not quite willing to let the subject die. "Lot of unsettled territory between here and the border. A woman alone has made it this far," Opal said pleasantly, and laid her coin on the counter. Herbert took the coin and said no more. It was while she was reviewing the map Herbert unrolled across the scarred wooden counter that the door to the general store opened and let in a gust of dry wind and a very tall man. Nathan Donnelly was 29 years old, built like someone had assembled him specifically for hard labor and hard living. He had dark hair that curled slightly at the collar, eyes the color of a weather-threatening sky-deep gray with the occasional flash of something warmer, and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from the same red rock that made up the ridgelands outside town. He wore his gun belt low on his hip the way men did when they were serious about it, and his boots were the kind that had walked 1,000 miles and had the scars to prove it. He owned exactly what he could carry: a bedroll, a saddlebag, a canteen, and a knife. He did not own property, he did not hold a deed, and he had not slept more than 2 nights in the same place in 4 years. He was, as the people in Redemption knew him, a drifter, the kind who took trail work when it suited him and moved on when it did not. He walked to the counter, nodded at Herbert, and then noticed the woman studying the map with intense focus. "You are looking at the wrong route," he said. Opal did not look up. You are. That passage through Caldwell Canyon floods this time of year. The eastern ridge is better riding." She glanced up then and measured him in the way she had learned to measure men, quickly, without sentiment. "And you would know that because I came through there 3 days ago," he said. He moved beside her and pointed at the map without asking permission, his finger tracing a line along the eastern edge of the printed territory. "Here, takes an extra half-day, but the ground is solid." She studied the line he indicated, then looked at the map again and made her own calculation. "That adds 12 miles. "It adds 12 miles and subtracts getting your horse drowned," he said. Opal was quiet for a moment, and then she nodded once, a small, precise acknowledgement that cost her nothing and gave him very little. "Thank you," she said. Nathan picked up the flour and coffee beans he had come for, paid Herbert, and turned to leave. Then he paused at the door. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Las Cruces," she said. "I have land there. My father left it to me." He looked at her steadily. "That is a long ride, 340 miles, give or take, she agreed. I have done longer. He studied her for a moment with those gray eyes, and something moved in his expression, a flicker of curiosity sharpened by something else he did not entirely recognize. You traveling alone? She folded the map with the same precision she had used studying it. I was planning to. Was planning to, he repeated. You heard me correctly, she said. He set his hand on the doorframe. The morning light caught the dust motes in the air between them. Nathan Donnelly, he said. Opal Thatcher, she replied. He nodded as though filing the name away somewhere important. The Eastern Ridge, he said. Do not forget. I have a good memory, she said. He walked out and the door swung shut behind him. Herbert watched the exchange with bright-eyed interest and said nothing until Opal lifted her saddlebag and turned for the door herself. That is Nathan Donnelly, he said helpfully. Best tracker in the territory. He does not travel with partners. Neither do I, said Opal Thatcher, and walked out into the September sun. She resaddled her roan mare, whose name was Juniper, a name given for no reason other than that Opal had liked the sound of it and secured her newly purchased supplies with the efficient, practiced motions of someone who had been packing light for a very long time. She had learned the art of traveling light from necessity. Her mother had died when she was 12. Her father had been a surveyor and a dreamer who moved constantly, and Opal had spent her entire childhood learning that the things you carried had to be worth their weight every single mile. She had carried that philosophy into adulthood. When her father, Thomas Thatcher, had died 6 months ago in Las Cruces of a fever, he had left her a small deed to 40 acres of land on the Rio Grande, along with a letter that said simply, "It is good land, Opal. Go and see it." She intended to do exactly that. She had ridden from Abilene, where she had been working as a seamstress and occasionally as a schoolteacher's assistant, neither of which had suited her particularly well, and she had made it to Redemption in 11 days of steady riding. The road ahead was longer and harder, through territory that was rough at the best of times. The Army had been conducting campaigns in the region for years. The Apache resistance under various leaders had made the southern territories dangerous and contested, and the land itself was demanding in ways that had nothing to do with human conflict: heat, drought, sudden storms, canyon crossings that could break an axle or a leg without warning. Opal knew all of this. She had read everything she could find about the territory before she left Abilene. She had her rifle, her cartridges, her map, and her good horse. She had a letter from her father's solicitor establishing her claim to the land. She had 2 changes of clothing, a small medical kit, a folding knife, and $22 in coin. She was ready. She rode out of Redemption just after noon, taking Nathan Donnelly's advice about the Eastern Ridge without announcing to anyone that she was doing so. She had been on the Eastern Road for perhaps 2 hours when she heard hoofbeats behind her and turned in the saddle to see Nathan Donnelly riding a big buckskin horse at an easy canter, closing the distance between them with the unhurried confidence of a man who knew the terrain was on his side. She slowed Juniper and waited, one hand resting near but not on the rifle. He pulled up alongside her. "I am going south," he said. "So am I," she replied. "I know." They rode in silence for a quarter mile. The red ridge rose on their right, and the sky above it was the particular deep blue of autumn in West Texas, cloudless and vast and slightly indifferent to everything that happened beneath it. "I do not need a guide," she said finally. "I did not offer to be one," he said. "Then what are you doing?" "Going south," he said, and there was the briefest movement at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile. Opal looked at him sideways and decided, after a moment's honest assessment, that she did not object to the company. She would not tell him so, but she did not object. "I travel light," she said. "And I travel fast. I do not stop early and I do not sleep late." "Neither do I," he said. "Good," she said. They rode south. The first day passed in a rhythm of comfortable silence broken by occasional conversation. Nathan knew the terrain the way a river knows its own bed, not through thought but through accumulated experience, and he pointed out a watering hole 2 miles off the main track that did not appear on her map, and a ridge crossing that saved them half a mile of switchback. He did these things without ceremony, in the same tone he might use to note the weather, and Opal received each piece of information with attention rather than gratitude, which he seemed to find appropriate. She learned things about him in pieces, the way you learn things about the land gradually through observation. He had grown up in Missouri, he had come west at 19, he had worked cattle drives, scouting contracts, and trail work for the past decade. He had no family that he spoke of with any warmth. He had a horse named simply Buck, which she thought was the least imaginative name she had ever heard for an animal, and she told him so. He looked at the horse with what appeared to be mild surprise. "He is a buckskin," he said, as though this explained everything. "Every buckskin in the territory is named Buck," she said. "That horse deserves more." Nathan considered this with unexpected seriousness. "What would you name him?" "Something that fits him. What does he do that is particular to him?" Nathan was quiet for a while. "He does not spook," he said finally. "Nothing spooks him, not gunfire, not snakes, not sudden drops." "Then his name should be something about steadiness," she said. "Bedrock, stone, anchor." Nathan looked at the horse again. "Anchor," he said, as though testing the weight of it. "You can think about it," she said. "I have had him 4 years," he said. "It is not too late," she said. He said nothing more about it then, but she caught him, an hour later, quietly saying the word under his breath when he patted the horse's neck. Anchor. She did not comment on it. They made camp as the sun went down in a long horizontal smear of orange and purple that painted the ridge in colors that had no adequate name. Nathan built a fire with the economical efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times. No wasted motion, no unnecessary wood. A clean small blaze that gave heat and light without announcing itself to the whole territory. Opal unpacked her own supplies and prepared her own food without asking for assistance or offering him any, which he seemed to find neither rude nor notable. They ate their respective meals on opposite sides of the fire in a silence that had, over the course of the afternoon, shifted from neutral to something more companionable. "You said you have land at Las Cruces," he said eventually. 40 acres on the Rio Grande. My father surveyed it himself years ago. He always meant to build something there." She paused. "He never quite got around to it." "What are you going to do with it?" She looked into the fire. "Settle, build something." "I have some skills and enough sense to learn what I do not know. The land near the river is good for farming if you know how to manage the water. I have been reading about irrigation methods." She glanced up at him. "You think that is a strange ambition for a woman." "I did not say so," he replied. "You were thinking it." "I was thinking," he said carefully, "that it is a lot of work for one person." "Yes," she agreed. "It is, but it is my work." He looked at her across the fire, and she looked back, and neither of them looked away for a moment that stretched slightly longer than ordinary conversation required. "How long have you been traveling alone?" he asked. "Since I was 12 and my mother died and my father picked up and moved us from Missouri to Kansas to Colorado to Texas. I have never really known anything else." "Missouri," he said. "You too," she said. Something shifted in his expression, a small unlocking. "I left when I was 19. "So did I," she said. "Not physically, but something left at 19. He understood what she meant. She could see it in the way he nodded. Not the nod of a man being polite, but the nod of a man who recognized the specific shape of a feeling he had carried for a long time without a name for it. They let the fire burn low and went to sleep on their respective bedrolls, and the stars over West Texas wheeled overhead in their ancient, indifferent beauty, and the coyotes called to each other from the ridges, and the night was cold and clean. The second day brought harder riding. Nathan's alternate route along the eastern ridge was exactly what he had promised: solid ground, clear passage. But it was also steeper in places than the map suggested. And by mid-morning, they were picking their way through a section of rocky terrain where one wrong step would send horse and rider sliding down a 40-foot embankment into a dry gully. Opal took the difficult section at the same pace Nathan did, which was slow and deliberate, reading the ground before every step. She had good hands on a horse. She could feel through the reins what the animal was thinking before it thought it. Juniper trusted her in the way horses trust riders who have never given them reason not to. Halfway through the worst section, Nathan's horse anchor, she noted. He had started calling him that this morning, shifted sideways on a loose piece of shale and caught himself with a scramble that sent pebbles cascading down the embankment. Nathan steadied him instantly with seat and leg, and the horse recovered without incident. "Good horse," Opal said. "Good name," he said, and there was warmth in it. She smiled then, a real one, unexpected, that she felt in her whole face. She looked away quickly, back at the ground ahead, and continued picking through the rocks. They cleared the ridge by early afternoon and came down onto a wide flat of scrubland that stretched south toward a line of dark hills 10 miles distant. The riding opened up and they moved at a better pace, side by side, with the autumn sun on their backs and the dry grass moving around them in a steady westerly wind. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask," he said. "Why are you going south? You did not say before." He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "There is a job in El Paso, scouting work for a ranch that is trying to establish a new grazing route north of the Rio Grande. The owner sent word to Redemption last month. And that is all, just the next job. That is generally how it works," he said. She thought about that. "Does it ever bother you, not having a place?" He looked at the horizon. "I travel light," he said, and the words had the quality of something he had said before, a phrase worn smooth by use, like a stone in a riverbed. "You cannot do this kind of work carrying much weight." "I travel light too," she said. "Look at my kit. I am carrying less than most men I have met on the road." He glanced at her saddlebag, which was genuinely and impressively compact. "You do," he admitted. "Then what is the difference?" she said. He turned his eyes back to the horizon and did not answer right away. When he did speak, his voice was measured in a way that suggested he was being honest with himself as much as with her. "A woman is different. There are things a woman needs that a man does not. Attachments, a place, people." Opal looked at him steadily. "That is a very presumptuous thing to say." "Is it wrong?" "It is a generalization," she said. "That says more about what you assume than what you know. I have no attachments that weigh me down. I have no people I am leaving behind. I have a destination, supplies for one, and a horse I can trust. What precisely is it that you think I am carrying that makes me different from you?" He looked at her properly then, turning in the saddle so he was fully facing her. There was something in his expression she had not seen there before, a genuine reckoning, the expression of a man who has had an argument land somewhere it was not expected. "I did not mean it as an insult," he said. "I know you did not," she said. "That is why it is worth saying out loud." He nodded slowly. They rode on. That evening they made camp near a dry creek bed where a stand of cottonwoods provided windbreak and shade. The temperature dropped fast once the sun went down, as it always did in the high desert, and Nathan built the fire slightly larger than the previous night. He made coffee, real coffee, which he had packed in a tin and brewed in a small pot with the care of someone who considered it one of the few genuine luxuries worth carrying, and he poured a second cup without asking and set it near her. She picked it up without comment and drank it, and it was good, and the warmth of it went into her hands and her chest, and she felt, for a moment, something very close to simple happiness. "Tell me about your father," he said. She considered the request. "He was a good man who was better at dreaming than doing," she said. "He wanted things, land, a home, a proper life, but he always found reasons to keep moving before he built any of them. I think the land in Las Cruces was the first thing he ever fully committed to. He filed the deed properly and everything. He just died before he could get back to it." "Are you like him?" "In some ways," she said. "The moving, the traveling light. But I think I am better at finishing things than he was. I have always finished what I started. And this," he gestured vaguely south, "is this finishing something or starting something?" "At the fire. Both," she said quietly. "It is finishing what he started, and it is starting what I want." He was watching her in a way that had changed gradually over 2 days, less assessment, more something else. She was aware of it the way you are aware of weather changing, a shift in pressure that you cannot see but can feel in the air. "You are not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "Someone who needed to be talked out of a bad idea," she smiled. "And what do you think now?" He looked at the coffee in his hands. "I think you are going to get to Las Cruces whether I am riding beside you or not." "Yes," she said, "I am." "I think," he said slowly, "that might be one of the most impressive things I have ever heard a person say." She looked at him, surprised by the sincerity of it. He meant it. She could see that he meant it plainly and without any attempt to make it charming. "Thank you," she said, and she meant that too. The third day they encountered trouble. It was not the kind of trouble that arrived with violence, though it had the potential for it. They were passing through a narrow valley between two low mesas when they came upon a man, clearly a rancher, from his dress blocking the road, with a wagon he had positioned deliberately across the track. He had 2 hands with him, both armed, and all 3 men wore the kind of expressions that said they had been waiting. Nathan's hand moved to his gun belt and stayed there, loose but ready. Opal kept her hands visible on the reins. "This is Hendricks' land," the man said. His name, as it turned out, was Warren Hendricks, and he was a cattleman who had been asserting his ownership over a chunk of public range by virtue of a fence line and a willingness to argue about it. "Road through here is closed." "This road," Nathan said, "is surveyed federal land. You do not have the authority to close it." "I have 3 rifles," Hendricks said. "That is not a legal citation," Opal said clearly. Hendricks looked at her with the particular frustration of a man who has not expected a woman to speak. "Ma'am, you should let your husband handle this." "He is not my husband," she said, "and I am handling it myself. This road is a public passage. The survey maps clearly show the established route of travel along this valley, and the Homestead Act of 1862 does not grant the right to block roads used by traveling parties. You may have strong feelings about this land, but your strong feelings do not supersede federal survey rights." There was a silence. Nathan kept his eyes on the 2 hands, reading them. They were employed men, not committed men. They would follow orders up to a point, but that point had limits. Hendricks looked at Opal with an expression that had moved from frustration to something like bewildered anger. "Young woman, move the wagon," she said. Her voice was level and absolutely serious. "We will say nothing more about it. We will pass through, and we will be gone in 10 minutes. That is the simplest outcome and the best one for everyone here." The silence stretched for a long, charged moment. Nathan said nothing. He understood, in a way that was wholly instinctive, that Opal had this, and that the most useful thing he could do was be present and prepared and not interfere. One of the hands said something low to Hendricks that Opal could not hear. Hendricks stared at her for another 3 seconds. Then he jerked his chin at the hand, and the wagon was moved. They rode through without looking back. When the valley widened out behind them and the mesas retreated, Nathan let out a slow breath. "You knew the survey law," he said. "I told you my father was a surveyor," she said. He looked at her profile, the clean line of her jaw, the particular set of her shoulders, the completely unrattled quality of her bearing. "You were not afraid," he said. "I was a little afraid," she admitted. "But fear and action are not mutually exclusive." He rode beside her in silence for a long time after that, and what he was feeling working its way up through the particular armor a man builds over years of traveling alone was something he did not have a ready word for. It was admiration, certainly. It was also something more personal than that, something that had to do with the specific nature of the person beside him, the way she combined toughness and grace and knowledge and honesty in a proportion he had not encountered before. He did not say any of this, but he rode closer to her than he had before, close enough that their knees nearly touched when the trail narrowed, and neither of them moved to create more distance. The 4th day brought rain, the abrupt, hammering kind that the high desert occasionally produced in September, coming off nowhere visible in the sky and arriving with complete commitment. They had been riding for 2 hours in clear weather when the clouds rolled in from the northwest with sudden purpose, and within 20 minutes it was raining hard enough to make the trail ahead indistinct. Nathan pulled up and looked around with the quick, professional scan of someone assessing options. "There is a way station," he said. "Maybe 3 miles east. Old mail station. Should still have a roof." "Should," she said. "The roof was good last year," he said. "I would give it a fair chance." They rode for the way station with the rain hammering their hats and running off their slickers in sheets. The land around them went dark and silver, and the distant mesas dissolved into gray shapes. Juniper and Anchor both lowered their heads and moved with steady patience through the downpour, earning their respective reputations as solid horses. The way station was a low adobe building with a lean-to attached on the south side, the kind of structure that had served the Butterfield Overland Mail decades before and now stood on the landscape the way old things do, slightly less than it was but still functional. The roof was good, as it turned out. The interior was dusty and empty but dry, with a stone hearth on the north wall and enough old wood piled in the corner to start a fire. They got the horses into the lean-to and unsaddled them and gave them what grain they had, and then Nathan got a fire going in the hearth, while Opal pulled their wet gear off and spread it near the growing warmth to dry. The rain came down outside in a steady gray curtain, and the adobe walls absorbed the sound of it into something almost peaceful. They sat near the fire. Nathan's hair was dark with rain and curled slightly more where it was wet. Opal had taken her braid down to dry, and her hair lay loose over her shoulders in waves of dark auburn that the firelight turned to something between copper and gold. He looked at her and then looked away and then looked at her again, and she saw the second look and held it. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "You looked at me twice." "People look at things twice," he said. "Not you," she said. "You are very deliberate. When you look at something twice, it means you are trying to figure something out." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Have you ever thought about not arriving?" She was surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "Las Cruces," he said. "The land." "Have you ever thought riding through all of this?" He gestured at the rain-dark window. "Have you ever thought that the journey might be the thing, rather than the destination?" She considered the question with the attention it deserved. "My father thought that," she said, "for most of his life, and he died with 40 acres he never built on and a daughter he never quite gave a permanent home to." She paused. "I think the journey is important, but I think the arriving matters too. I think you need both." He looked into the fire. "I have been at the journey part for a long time." "I know," she said quietly. "I do not know how to do the other part," he said, and it came out with an honesty that seemed to surprise him slightly, as though the words had moved faster than his usual caution allowed. She looked at him steadily. "You figure it out," she said. "The same way you figured out the terrain and the watering holes and which ridges flood and which roads are solid. You pay attention and you learn and you do the work." He looked at her then, a full look, unhurried, the kind that he had been managing and redirecting for 4 days, and she looked back at him the same way. "Opal," he said. "Nathan," she said, and that was all they said. But something passed between them in the firelight of that old adobe way station, in the sound of the rain, something that was quiet and large, and had been building since she looked up from a map in a general store, and measured him with those sharp green eyes. He reached out and touched her hand, just the back of it, just a brush of his fingers, and she turned her hand and let his fingers rest against her palm. They sat like that in the firelight while the rain came down outside, and neither of them needed to say anything for a while. The 5th day they rode into a different kind of country, the land beginning to shift south, the red rock giving way to drier yellows and browns, the vegetation thinning to creosote and yucca, and the occasional spindly outline of an ocotillo against the blue sky. The air had a different quality here, drier and sharper, and the distances seemed to expand, and the sky felt bigger than it had farther north. They talked more freely now. The thing that had settled between them in the way station had not made them awkward. It had done the opposite, loosening something in both of them. Nathan told her about Missouri, about a farm outside St. Joseph that had been sold piece by piece during a long drought when he was a boy, about a father who had tried hard and a mother who had loved well and died young. He had two older brothers, both of whom had stayed in Missouri, both of whom he wrote letters to occasionally without much expectation of response. He had not gone home in 6 years. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "I miss what it was," he said, "before the drought. There was a time when that farm was everything I thought I would ever need. Good land, family, the kind of ordinary life that you do not appreciate until it is gone." "Why did you leave?" "The farm was gone," he said simply. "My father took work in town. My brothers found their own paths. I was 19 and the only direction that felt possible was west." He paused. "And the west was big enough to get lost in for a long time. Are you still lost?" She asked, and the question was gentle but direct in the way her questions always were. He thought about it honestly, which she always seemed to require of him. "I was," he said. "I think I was for a long time without knowing it because I was busy enough that it did not feel like being lost. It felt like living." He paused. "I am less sure of the distinction now." "That might be progress," she said. He looked at her sidelong. "You have a way of reframing things." "I have a way of saying what I see," she said. "Whether that is a reframing depends on where you were standing before." He shook his head, but there was warmth in it. "Where did you learn to talk like that?" "My father talked like a surveyor," she said. "Everything was about perspective and measurement and what you could see from where you were standing. I suppose some of it took." They rode through a small settlement at midday, a cluster of adobe buildings around a well, with a few families who were homesteading the flats. The people there were a mixture of Texas settlers and Mexican families who had been on the land for generations, existing in the complicated adjacency that was common in this part of the territory, where the question of whose land it had been before and whose it was now ran under every interaction like groundwater. A woman there, Mrs. Elena Vila, perhaps 40, with a baby on her hip and 3 other children circling her feet, told them that a group of riders had been through 2 days prior, moving south, asking about a woman traveling alone with a red-haired horse. Opal and Nathan exchanged a look. "What sort of riders?" Nathan asked. 5 men, Mrs. Vila said. "Not cowboys, not army, something in between but not the good kind." She looked at Opal directly. "They asked if anyone had seen you." Opal kept her expression calm. "Did they give a reason?" "They said you had property belonging to them, a deed." Mrs. Vila paused. "I have seen men like that before. They lie easily." "Yes," said Opal, "they do." After they thanked Mrs. Vila and her family and rode on, Nathan waited until they were well clear of the settlement before speaking. "Someone knows about the Las Cruces land," he said. "I have been thinking about that," she said. Her voice was steady, but he could see in the set of her jaw that she was troubled. "My father's solicitor in Abilene, a man named Price, he handled the paperwork for the land deed. He knew what it was worth. The land sits right on the Rio Grande. Water rights, fertile ground. It is worth considerably more than 40 acres of average land." "And Price?" "I do not know," she said. "I thought he was a decent man, but decency and money do not always keep company." 5 men, Nathan said. He was quiet for a moment, running the practical arithmetic of the situation. "They are ahead of us. Depending on where they are going, they may be between us and Las Cruces. Or they may reach Las Cruces first and try to establish some kind of false claim before I arrive," she said. "That is the more likely play. 5 men coming after 1 woman on the road is a spectacle. Planting a claim and waiting is quieter." "You think like a lawyer," he said. "I think like someone who has read the land laws of the New Mexico territory," she said. He admired her so thoroughly in that moment that it was almost uncomfortable. "We should push the pace," he said. "Yes," she agreed. They pushed the pace. The 6th and 7th days blurred together in the urgency of faster riding and longer hours. They rose before dawn and rode until the light failed, stopping only for the horses' sake and for the brief hours of sleep that made continued riding possible. They spoke less, not out of coldness but out of shared purpose, the way people sometimes stop talking when they are wholly engaged in the same task. But in the evenings, around the smaller and quicker fires of two people who were now genuinely concerned about the situation ahead, they talked in a different way. Not the gradual, exploratory conversations of the first days, but conversations that had gone deeper, that had gotten to things both of them had kept packed away with the rest of the weight they had decided not to carry. On the sixth night, in the shelter of a low rock overhang south of a place called Cornuda Spring, with the stars enormous and close overhead, Nathan said, "I have not stayed in one place long enough to know what I would want it to look like." "What?" she asked. "A home," he said, and the word came out carefully as though it had edges. "I have not been still long enough to imagine it properly." She was quiet for a moment. "I have," she said. "I have imagined it a great deal. I imagined it my whole childhood, moving around after my father. I know exactly what I want it to look like." "Tell me," he said. She looked at the fire. "A house on the river, not large, I do not need large, but solid. Adobe, probably the way the older houses in this country are built because they know the climate. A garden on the south side. A working space for the farm tools, a small barn. Enough land under cultivation to be self-sufficient in most things. A porch." She paused. "I have always wanted a porch. My father said porches were for people who had given up looking for the next thing. I thought that sounded wonderful." He smiled. It was the full smile, the one she had been seeing more and more of over the past days. It transformed his face completely, erased the weather-beaten reserve, and showed something underneath that was younger and warmer than his usual expression. "A porch sounds wonderful," he agreed. "You could rest on it," she said, "and watch the river, and be somewhere." "Be somewhere," he repeated. "Instead of everywhere," she said. "Which sounds like freedom until you realize you are just everywhere and nowhere at the same time." He looked at her for a long moment. "You have described the last 10 years of my life in one sentence," he said. "I am very efficient," she said. He laughed, a real laugh, low and genuine, that she felt she had earned in some way she was proud of. "Opal," he said. "Nathan," she said. "I think I am riding south for reasons that have nothing to do with the scouting job in El Paso," he said. She held his gaze. "I know," she said. "I knew somewhere around day 3. And you did not say anything." "I was waiting for you to figure it out," she said. "You are very deliberate. You think things through before you act." "Do you think I take too long?" he asked. She considered. "No," she said honestly. "I think you take exactly as long as you need, which is more than I can say for most people." He reached across the space between them and tucked a strand of her loose hair back behind her ear, his fingers barely touching her temple, and the tenderness of the gesture from a man who had spent 10 years building himself into something that traveled without attachments undid something in her chest that she had not realized was wound so tightly. "I do not know how to do this," he said quietly. "Stay," she said. "That is the first thing. Just stay." He nodded. Something in his face settled, like a man who has made a decision that was a long time coming, and is surprised to find it feels like relief rather than loss. "I am staying," he said. The 8th day they crossed into the territory that would become New Mexico in 5 years. Though in 1882 it was still the territory of New Mexico, not yet a state, with all the looseness and possibility and occasional danger that came with that designation. The land changed again here, the vegetation shifting, the mountains visible now in the south as dark shapes against the horizon that grew taller and more defined with each mile. They had seen no sign of the 5 riders, which meant either they were well ahead or they had taken a different route. Opal kept her rifle accessible and her eyes open, and Nathan rode with the heightened attention of a man who knew how to read the landscape for things that did not belong. On the afternoon of the 8th day, they came to a small town called Mesilla, which sat in the Rio Grande Valley not far north of Las Cruces. It was a proper town with a plaza and an adobe church and streets that had been there since before the American takeover of the territory in 1848, and where Spanish was spoken as commonly as English, and the architecture was the old Spanish colonial kind that had been modified and adapted, but never entirely replaced. They stopped at a cantina there for a real meal. the first cooked food they had eaten in days, and Opal inquired about the land registry office and the territorial judge who handled property disputes, whose name, she had been told by her father's solicitor, was Honorable Judge Marcus Reyes. The cantina owner's wife, a woman named Rosario who had the brisk efficiency of someone who had managed a successful business for 30 years, told Opal that Judge Reyes held court in Las Cruces proper, at the county building on Main Street. She also told Opal, lowering her voice slightly, that 5 Anglo men had passed through Mesilla 2 days ago, asking about property near the river, and that they had spoken with a local notary. "What notary?" Opal asked, her voice very quiet. "A man named Harlan Price," Rosario said, Opal's jaw tight. She looked at Nathan across the table. "The solicitor from Abilene," he said. "He is already here," she said. "He came ahead. He has been working on this for a while. He filed something with the notary." Nathan said. "He tried to," Rosario said. "But the notary here, my cousin's husband, he did not like the look of the men or the papers. He told them the filing needed to go to Las Cruces proper, to the county office. He gave them nothing." Opal exhaled slowly. "Thank you," she said to Rosario, and she meant it deeply. "Women who ride alone this far south," Rosario said, with a look that acknowledged both the difficulty and the accomplishment, "deserve to arrive at where they are going." They left Mesilla within the hour and rode the remaining miles to Las Cruces. Las Cruces in 1882 was a growing town. The arrival of the Santa Fe Railway the previous year had changed its character considerably, bringing commerce and people, and the particular mix of opportunity and trouble that railroads always brought to western towns. It had a proper main street, several hotels, a newspaper, a land office, and a county courthouse where Judge Marcus Reyes held his sessions. They rode in late in the afternoon of the 8th day, trail dusty and road-worn, and went directly to the county courthouse. Harlan Price was there. He was a thin man in an expensive coat that looked out of place in the courtroom dust, with the particular polished composure of a man who was used to winning arguments with paper rather than with guns. He had with him 2 of the 5 ridersmen who stood at the back of the small anteroom looking like what they were, which was hired trouble that Price had dressed up as witnesses. Opal walked into the room and Price's composure flickered for a moment, just a moment before resettling. "Miss Thatcher," he said. "Mr. Price," she said, "you have had a long ride." "I have been protecting an important legal matter," he said. His voice was smooth and practiced. "Your father's land deed. I am afraid there was a significant clerical error in the original filing that needs to be—" "No, there was not," she said. She opened her saddlebag and produced the deed, the letter from her father, the copy of the original survey documents, and a letter she had obtained from the land office in Abilene before leaving, certifying the filing date and her status as the sole legal heir of Thomas Thatcher. She laid them on the clerk's desk with steady hands. "The original deed was filed on April 3, 1878, she said. "The survey was conducted by Thomas Thatcher, a licensed surveyor, in 1877. The land was recorded under his name and transferred to me, his only surviving heir, upon his death in March of this year. The paperwork is complete, it is in order, and it has been reviewed by the land office in Abilene. If you have a competing claim, Mr. Price, I would like to see it." Price looked at the papers she had laid on the desk. He looked at Nathan, who was standing behind Opal's right shoulder with his arms crossed and his gray eyes on Price with an expression of complete, unhurried attention. He looked at the clerk, who had pulled out a ledger and was already comparing documents with the focused efficiency of someone who knew his job. "I would like to speak with your attorney," Price said. "I am representing myself," she said. "I know the law sufficiently for this purpose. What I would like is to speak with Judge Reyes." Judge Marcus Reyes, as it turned out, was available within the hour. He was a man of perhaps 60, with the deep quiet of someone who had been listening to people argue in this county for 30 years, and had long since developed the ability to identify nonsense rapidly and dismiss it with appropriate efficiency. He looked at Opal's papers. He looked at Price's papers, a hastily assembled collection that attempted to argue that Thomas Thatcher had made a verbal agreement to sell the land to a corporation called the Rio Grande Land and Development Company before his death. A verbal agreement, Judge Reyes said, in the tone of a man who had heard this argument before and had not been impressed the previous times either. With no witnesses and no written record, and your documentation for this corporation is dated 4 months after the death of Thomas Thatcher. It was Price started. No, said Judge Reyes. He turned to Opal. Miss Thatcher, your papers are in order. The land at the Rio Grande is yours under your father's deed and your status as his legal heir. I am recording this judgment in the county ledger today. He looked at Price. If you would like to contest this through the territorial court in Santa Fe, you are welcome to make that very long and expensive journey. I would recommend you save your time and money. Price left the courthouse with his hired men, and with the particular tight-faced dignity of a man who had lost and knew it and was not going to say so directly. Nathan watched him go, then turned to Opal, who was standing very still in the middle of the courtroom, holding her papers to her chest with both hands, and looking as though something very large and very long-held had just been resolved. Opal, he said quietly. She looked at him, and her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with sadness. It is mine, she said. It is really mine. He crossed the distance between them and put his hands on her shoulders, and she leaned forward slightly and pressed her forehead against his chest, and he held her the way he had not held anyone in a very long time, with a completeness and a care that had no reservation in it. Let us go see it, he said. They rode out to the land that afternoon. It was 40 acres on the west bank of the Rio Grande, just south of the town, where the cottonwoods grew along the river, and the water caught the evening light and turned it to hammered gold. The land was flat and good near the river, rising gently to a low shelf of harder ground that would be perfect for building. The remains of an old adobe wall suggested someone had started a structure there once, long before Thomas Thatcher had ever seen the place. Opal stood in the middle of the land with the river behind her and the late sun on her face, and she breathed in slow and deep and turned in a full circle, looking at every direction. Nathan stood and watched her, and what he was feeling was something he had stopped pretending. He did not know the name for somewhere around the 7th day of riding. It is everything he said in his letter, she said. He said it was good land. He was right. He was right, Nathan agreed. She turned to face him. The sun was behind her and the light haloed her in the particular gold that September evenings produced in the valley, and she was trail-dusty and road-worn, and her hair had come half loose from its braid, and she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen in 30 years of looking at the west. Stay, she said. You said that before, he said. I mean it more now, she said. Not just on the road, here, stay here. He looked at the land. He looked at the river. He looked at her. He did the calculation that he had been doing since a general store in Redemption, the calculation that had nothing to do with miles or supplies or terrain and everything to do with the specific arithmetic of what a life could be. I would need a purpose, he said. I cannot just be here, I need work. There is a ranch north of town that wants a scouting contract, she said. You mentioned El Paso, but there is work here, and the land needs building. I cannot do 40 acres alone. I am not a farmer, he said. Neither was I, she said, a month ago. He walked toward her and she did not move back, and when he stood in front of her he put his hand on her face, both hands, framing it, with the care of someone handling something they did not want to break, and she looked up at him with eyes that had no guardedness in them anymore, none of the measuring or the assessment, just the clear and uncomplicated fact of what she felt. I have been traveling light for 10 years, he said, because I thought that meant I was free. You were not free, she said gently. You were just moving. Yes, he said. I was. He looked at her for a long moment. You are lighter than me, he said. You proved that somewhere around the 2nd day. I told you, she said. You did, he said. And I want you to keep telling me things. He kissed her then, with the sun going down behind them and the Rio Grande moving past in its quiet, eternal way, and the cottonwoods in the evening wind, and it was a kiss that had 340 miles of road in it, and 8 days of learning someone's particular quality and finding it better than anything he had expected. She kissed him back with everything she had, which was considerable, and she put her hands flat against his chest and felt his heart beat, strong and steady, and thought of the word she had given his horse. Anchor. Yes, that was right. They stayed in Las Cruces in separate quarters at a boarding house while they began the work of establishing the claim formally and starting the building project. Opal hired 2 men from town brothers named Cordero, who were experienced adobe builders, to begin laying the foundation for the house on the higher shelf of ground she had identified as the best building site. Nathan took the scouting contract with the ranch north of town owned by a man named Bartlett who was working to establish grazing routes along the eastern mesa and spent his working days in the saddle doing what he was best at, and his evenings at the land, working alongside Opal and the Cordero brothers until the light failed. The work was good. It was the kind of work that accumulates, each day adding visibly to the previous day, the foundation growing, the walls rising course by course, the shape of the house emerging from the landscape with a solidity that Opal found almost overwhelming in its effect on her. She had spent her life watching things her father started but never finished. Watching something be actually built was different in a way she had not prepared for emotionally. Nathan watched her watch the house going up, and he understood what he was seeing. One evening in late October, when the walls were waist-high, and the adobe had dried to its characteristic pale gold in the afternoon sun, they sat on the low wall of the emerging structure with their feet on the dirt floor of what would be the main room, and Nathan said, "I want to ask you something." "You can ask," she said, in the exact words he had used to her on the second day. He heard it and smiled. "I have been thinking about what you said, about arriving." "What about it?" "I think I am done traveling," he said. "Not done with the work, I am good at the work and the territory needs it, but done with the part where I do not have anywhere to come back to." He looked at the half-built walls around them, at the river catching the last light 100 yards away, at the single tall cottonwood that stood near the building site that they had already agreed was not to be touched. "I want to come back to something." She looked at him steadily. "I want to come back to you," he said. "Specifically, not just to the land, not just to a place. To you, Opal." She held the moment for exactly the time it deserved, which was a breath and a heartbeat and a choice. "That is the best thing anyone has ever said to me," she said. "It is the truest thing I know how to say right now," he said. "Then say what comes after it," she said. He took her hand the way he had in the firelit adobe way station 11 days ago, unhurriedly, with complete attention. "Marry me," he said, "when you are ready, when it feels right to you. I am not going anywhere." She looked at him for a long time with those sharp green eyes that had measured and assessed and seen through 10 years of careful traveling light, all the way down to what was underneath it, which was a man who was good at heart and ready, for the first time, to stop moving. "The house needs a porch," she said. "We will build one," he said, "and a garden on the south side." "I know nothing about gardens," he said. "I know enough for both of us," she said. He squeezed her hand. "Is that a yes?" "That is a yes," she said, "with conditions." "What conditions?" "No more telling women what they need and what they cannot carry," she said. "No more assuming I need looking after." "You have not needed looking after once," he said. "Not for a single mile of 340. "Then we understand each other," she said. "We do," he said. He put his arm around her, and she leaned into him, and they sat on the wall of their unfinished house in the failing light, while the Rio Grande moved past in its ancient rhythm, and the cottonwood rustled, and somewhere south of them a nighthawk called. They were married in Mesilla on a Saturday in November, in the small adobe church on the plaza where Rosario from the cantina served as a witness, along with one of the Cordero brothers, and a young woman from the boarding house named Clara Baines, who had become something of a friend to Opal over the past weeks. Judge Reyes officiated, because he turned out to perform civil ceremonies, and seemed genuinely pleased by the occasion in the way of a man who spent most of his professional life adjudicating conflicts and was glad of something that was not won. Opal wore her best dress, a dark blue wool that she had packed in her saddlebag without Nathan knowing she had it, and which she had kept pristine through 11 days of trail riding and a month of construction work by the simple method of never taking it out until now. Nathan wore the same clean shirt and dark vest he had worn to the courthouse, which he had also been keeping for the occasion, which Opal did not discover until they were both standing in the church and realized they had both been quietly saving their best things for this moment. She laughed when she realized it. A real laugh, bright and genuine, and Nathan looked at her laughing in the November light in the old adobe church and thought that he would carry the specific quality of that sound for the rest of his life. It was the sound of a woman who had arrived somewhere she meant to be. They rode back to the land after the ceremony. The house was not finished. The walls were up and the roof was done, but the interior work remained, and they did not have furniture beyond what they had accumulated over the past weeks, and the garden on the south side was still just marked stakes in the ground. None of that was the point. The point was standing at the edge of the river in the late November afternoon with the cold air coming off the water and the cottonwood bare now, its branches like fine dark lines against the pale sky, with Opal's hand in his. "We are somewhere," she said. "We are somewhere," he said. The winter was the best winter Nathan Donnelly could remember. The work continued, the interior of the house taking shape, the furniture acquired piece by piece, the porch that Opal had spoken of on the road beginning to take form on the south side of the house with a view of the river and the cottonwood and the open sky. He continued his scouting work for Bartlett's ranch and for 2 other operations that had heard of his ability and wanted his services. It was flexible work, regular pay, and it kept him in the territory he knew. He was good at it and he liked it, but he came home to the land in the evenings, and home was a word that had begun, slowly, to mean something again. Opal threw herself into the work of the land with the focused energy of someone who had been waiting her whole life to have a place to put it. She had been corresponding through the winter with a man in El Paso who knew about river irrigation techniques, and she had spent a portion of the land's modest, starting income on seeds and tools, and a small kitchen garden that she started indoors in the winter months to get it ready for the spring planting. She read everything she could find about agriculture in the river valley. She talked to the Mexican families who had been farming the region for generations and who knew the specific rhythms of the Rio Grande, when it ran high, when it ran low, when the soil was good for what. She also learned to speak better Spanish than she already did, which was something she had started as a child and continued out of necessity and interest. By January, she could conduct a full conversation with Mrs. Elena Vila, who had also come south to Las Cruces with her family, and who had become a neighbor in the loose western sense, close enough to help, far enough to give room. Nathan watched Opal build her life on the land his wife had been right about, the land her father had been right about, and he felt something that was new to him and took time to identify. When he finally put a name to it, he understood why he had not recognized it at first. It was the feeling of being exactly where he was supposed to be. He had not felt that since he was a boy on the farm outside St. Joseph before the drought. He had not expected to feel it again. In the spring, Opal planted the garden on the south side of the house. She put in peppers and squash and beans and corn, and a row of herbs along the porch edge, rosemary and sage, and something she got from Elena Vila that had no English name but smelled like summer. She planted them with the same care she had given everything she undertook, which was absolute. Nathan built the porch. It took him 3 weekends and the better part of 2 evenings. Working with wood he had selected himself from the mill in town, and cut to the dimensions Opal had specified with the precision that he was coming to understand was characteristic of everything she touched. It ran the full length of the south side of the house, with a good solid railing and 2 chairs that he also built himself. the kind with wide arms that you could rest a coffee cup on. When it was done, Opal walked out onto it on a Sunday morning in April and stood at the railing and looked out at the river and the cottonwood and the mountains in the distance and the spring sky above all of it, and she was quiet for a long time. "My father would have loved this," she said. Nathan stood beside her. "Tell me more about him." She did. She talked about Thomas Thatcher for a long time that morning on the porch. He had built for her about his enthusiasms and his failures and his good heart, and the particular way he had of looking at the land as though it was a letter waiting to be read. She talked about the survey work and the moves and the years of almost settling, and she talked about the letter he had left her, the letter that had started all of this. "It is good land, Opal. Go and see it." "He was right," Nathan said. "He was usually right about the important things," she said. "He just needed too much space to be right about the everyday ones." "I think I understand that," Nathan said. "I know you do," she said. "That is why I knew you could be different, because you understood it from the inside." He put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him in the easy way of two people who have learned each other's particular weight and way of standing, and they looked at the river together in the April morning. In the summer of 1883, 1 year after Opal had ridden into Redemption on a September morning and turned the head of every man on the main street, she told Nathan, on the porch in the evening, with the fireflies beginning to appear over the river, that they were going to have a child. He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at her with an expression that she had never seen on him before, open and unguarded and lit with something that was not quite like anything she had seen on a face before. "A child," he said. "A child," she confirmed. He took her face in both hands, the way he had that first time in the last light of the 8th day, and he kissed her forehead and then her mouth, and she felt him exhale against her cheek as though he had been holding a breath for a long time. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I am extraordinary," he said. "I am absolutely extraordinary." She laughed, and he laughed with her, and the fireflies moved over the river, and the cottonwood stood in the summer dark, steady and still. The child, born in early February of 1884, was a boy. They named him Thomas for her father and called him Tom. He arrived in the world with his mother's green eyes and his father's quiet steadiness. And within the first hours of his existence, Nathan Donnelly had become the kind of man he had not known he could be, completely undone by something small and new and entirely dependent on the two of them. Opal recovered well, as she did everything, with focused efficiency, and by the time spring came she was back to her garden and her correspondence and her management of the land with the baby, in a sling made from a piece of good cotton she had purchased at the Mesilla market. Tom regarded the garden with the wide-eyed seriousness of an infant who finds everything equal interesting, and the river, when they took him to see it, made him very still in a way that his father took as a good sign. Elena Vila visited frequently, and Rosario from Mesilla came up twice in that first spring with food and advice, and the companionable presence of a woman who had done this 4 times, and could be relied upon to be calm about things that first-time parents found alarming. Opal was grateful in the deep and particular way of someone who had spent their life being largely self-sufficient, and had discovered, through having a family, that being cared for by people who did it freely and without keeping score was one of the finest things the world had to offer. Nathan had not taken a long scouting assignment since October, limiting his work to shorter trips that brought him home every few days. He had said this was practical. Opal knew it was more than that. She said nothing about it because it was his choice to make, and he was making it for good reasons, but she caught him sometimes watching Tom with the particular focus of a man who was memorizing something, making sure he did not miss any of it. She loved him for it without reservation. The land continued to develop. By 1885, they had a proper working farm, a kitchen garden that now fed them year-round, a field of corn and beans under irrigation from the river using the method Opal had corresponded about, and then built herself with Nathan's labor and the Cordero brothers' expertise, a small orchard of young trees on the higher ground, and a modest herd of 20 head of cattle that Nathan managed alongside his scouting work. They hired 2 men permanently, a young man named Aurelio Cordero, nephew of the Building brothers, who had grown up in the valley and knew the land well, and a woman named Petra who had come to them through Elena Vila's network looking for steady work, and who turned out to have more practical knowledge of desert farming than anyone Opal had ever met. The operation was small but solid, the kind of thing you could not disassemble quickly and did not want to, the kind of thing that lasted. In 1886, when Tom was 2 and walking with the focused determination of a toddler who has somewhere very important to be, Opal told Nathan on the porch one evening that there would be another child. He smiled this time without the stunned quality, a warm, immediate smile, like a man receiving news he had been hoping for. When? He asked. October, she said. Tom will be 2.5, he said, doing the calculation with the same directness he brought to all practical matters. He will manage, she said. He will, Nathan agreed. He manages everything. He is exactly like you. He is exactly like you, she said. He is stubborn and quiet, and he would rather figure something out himself than ask for help. Nathan laughed. He is exactly like both of us, he said. Heaven help the territory. The second child, born in October of 1886, was a girl. They named her Clara, for the young woman from the boarding house who had been Opal's first friend in Las Cruces, and who had since married one of the Cordero brothers and lived 10 minutes down the river road. Clara Donnelly arrived with her father's gray eyes and both her parents' stubbornness in full measure, and she screamed with authority at the entire world from her first moment in it, which Nathan said indicated a very healthy set of opinions. Tom took his sister's arrival with the solemnity of a 26-month-old who has decided that this is his responsibility, and spent considerable time sitting near her and watching her with the same evaluating gaze his mother had used on the map in Herbert Clegg's general store in Redemption 4 years ago. Opal saw it and nearly wept, which was not her usual way, but her children, she had discovered, could undo her in ways that nothing else could. Nathan built an addition to the house that winter a proper bedroom for Tom and eventually for Clara, when she was old enough, and extended the porch on the north side to make a shaded space for summer mornings. The house had begun as a simple structure and had grown organically with the family, the way good buildings do, each addition serving a real need and fitting the character of what was already there. On the evening after he finished the porch extension, they sat together in the south-facing chairs with the coffee Nathan still made with the care he had always given it, and the children asleep inside, and the river dark and moving in the November evening, and Nathan said, "Do you remember what you told me? That you wanted a porch." "I remember everything I said," she told him. "You said your father said porches were for people who had given up looking for the next thing. He did say that. And you said that sounded wonderful." "It did," she said. "It does." He was quiet for a moment. "I thought traveling light meant freedom," he said. "I told you that." "You did. You proved me wrong in 340 miles, he said. "It was not about being light," she said, "or about being heavy. It was about carrying the right things." "What are the right things?" he asked. She looked at him in the dark. This man she had measured across a counter in a dusty general store and found truer at every mile than the mile before. This man who had given his horse a better name and learned to build a porch and memorized his children's faces with quiet devotion. "You already know," she said. He reached across the space between the chairs and took her hand. She turned hers and let his fingers rest against her palm, the way she had the first time, in the way station with the rain coming down, and the years between that night and this one lay in the gesture like rings in good wood, visible, countable evidence of growth. "I know," he said. The years that followed were full of the particular, unheroic happiness that is the most enduring kind. Nathan's reputation as a tracker and scout grew until he had more work than he could take, and he built a small partnership with Aurelio Cordero that allowed them to divide the territory and manage contracts together. The farm continued to produce, and Opal added to it every season new varieties she researched through the agricultural extension that had established itself in the territory, new irrigation techniques, a second orchard of peach trees along the east fence line, whose fruit became something of a local legend when it ripened every August. Tom grew into the kind of boy who took things apart to understand how they worked and usually managed to put them back together, with improvements. Clara grew into the kind of girl who told you exactly what she thought about everything and was usually right. They were, as their father had predicted, exactly like both their parents in proportions that shifted depending on the day and the challenge at hand. When Tom was 7, he began riding seriously. Nathan taught him on Anchor, who was 12 years old by then, and had the patience of a horse who had decided that small people learning to ride was well within his capabilities. Tom sat on the big buckskin with the careful posture of a child who has been told exactly why things are done the way they are, which was Opal's influence. She had always explained the reasoning behind what she taught, believing that people who understood why did things better than people who were only told how. When Clara was 5, she came out to the barn one morning and informed Nathan that she intended to learn to track, because she had seen him reading the ground near the river and she wanted to know how it worked. Nathan looked at her, this small, gray-eyed, absolutely certain person, and thought of a woman walking into a general store in Redemption with a saddlebag and a spine, and a set of green eyes that saw straight through things. He spent the morning teaching Clara to track. By the time Tom was 10 and Clara was 7, the Donnelly farm was one of the most productive small operations on the Rio Grande, with a reputation that had spread through the valley not through self-promotion, but through the simple evidence of the place itself. The good adobe house with its 2 porches, the well-managed fields, the orchards, the clean fence lines, the overall quality of a place that had been built by people who meant to stay. People came to ask Opal's advice about irrigation and soil management, and she gave it freely and thoroughly, because information given generously tended to come back generous. Nathan served for 2 years on the county land committee, not because he wanted political standing, but because the territory's land use questions were important ones, and he knew them from the ground up, and someone needed to be there who had actually ridden the terrain under discussion. He still traveled for his scouting work. It was in his nature, and the work was genuinely valuable, and he was good at it. But he came home, every time, to the land and the river and the cottonwood and the porch and the garden on the south side, and the 2 children who met him at the gate, with the confidence of children who have never had reason to doubt that the person they were waiting for would arrive. He came home to Opal, who was always reliably doing something, reading, planning, working, tending, building, and who looked up when he came through the gate with the same direct green regard she had leveled at him the first time they met, and whose expression in those moments of reunion had a warmth in it that he had learned was the specific reserved for him and never depleted. One evening in the summer of 1898, years after a September morning in Redemption, they sat together on the south porch with their coffee while Tom and Clara ran in the last light by the river. The peach trees were in their late summer heavy fruit, and the smell of them was something particular to this place at this time of year, something that had no equivalent anywhere else. "Nathan," she said. "Opal," he said, "do you know what I was thinking about today?" "Tell me," he said. "I was thinking about Herbert Clegg's general store," she said, "and the map on the counter," he smiled, "and the wrong route. And the man who told me I was looking at the wrong route," she said. "Who then told me I was traveling too light for a woman." "I said that," he confirmed without defensiveness. "You did," she said, "and then I rode out of Redemption and you followed me." "I did," he said. Because I could not think of a single good reason not to," he said, "and quite a few reasons to." She looked at the river, at the children running in the last gold light, at the peach trees heavy with their fruit, at the way the cottonwood stood its permanent ground near the water, the way it had always stood and would stand when they were gone. "I packed less than you," she said. "You did," he said. "You packed considerably less than me." And arrived further, she said. Yes, he said. Further than I knew to go. She reached across and took his hand. The evening came on in the warm, particular way of summer evenings in the Rio Grande Valley, slow and golden, and then suddenly full dark with stars that spread overhead in the vast indifferent beauty that Nathan had looked at for 30 years of Western living, and had never stopped finding astonishing. The children came in from the river, smelling of water and summer, and Clara had something in her cupped hands that she held out to her parents with the intensity of a child presenting something very important. A moth, brown and perfect, wings spread in the circle of her palms. I caught it near the water, she said. You should let it go, Opal said gently. Clara considered this with her characteristic seriousness. Then she lifted her hands and opened them, and the moth flew up into the dark and was gone. Tom watched it go with his father's quiet face. Clara watched it too. Then she looked at her mother with those gray eyes. Did it know where it was going? She asked. Opal looked at Nathan across the porch, across the 8 years and the 340 miles and the 2 children and the good land and the life built from a deed and a direction, and a saddlebag packed for one. Sometimes, she said, you find out where you are going by going there. Clara considered this. Tom was already thinking about something else the way his father did. The night was full of crickets and the sound of the river. Nathan squeezed Opal's hand in the dark. She squeezed back. The porch was solid under them. The house behind them was solid. The land around them, and the river and the cottonwood and the peach trees were solid, built and tended and chosen and stayed for. And every year they had added to its solidity another season of growing, another addition to the house, another year of the particular accumulation that happens when 2 people decide to arrive somewhere and mean it. In 1892, when Clara was 6 and Tom was 8, and the farm was producing its best yield since they had begun, Opal found her father's surveying instruments in the bottom of an old trunk, the transit, and the chain measure, and the handwritten field notebooks that Thomas Thatcher had carried through Missouri and Kansas and Colorado and Texas, and finally, all the way to Las Cruces, where he had measured and recorded 40 acres on the Rio Grande and called them good. She sat at the kitchen table with the notebooks open in front of her and read her father's handwriting, the precise notations of a surveyor alongside occasional personal observations that had no business being in a professional field book and were the better for it. The date of the survey, July 14, 1877. The description of the land, good sandy loam near river. Cottonwood, largest specimen, approximately 60 feet. Elevation adequate above flood line. Water rights from established acequia to be negotiated with Vila family, neighbors, good people. Potential excellent. And at the bottom of the last page in a slightly different ink, added later, Opal will love it. She sat with that for a long time. Nathan found her there when he came in from the fields, and he pulled up the chair beside her without asking and looked at what she was looking at, the old field book, the surveyor's handwriting, the final note. She showed him the line. He read it and looked at her and said nothing for a moment. He knew you, Nathan said. He did, she said, better than I thought sometimes. He was right. He was right about the land, she said. He was right about me. He was just not around to see it. Nathan put his arm around her and she leaned against him, and they sat in the kitchen of the house they had built on the land Thomas Thatcher had surveyed, with the survey notebooks on the table between them, and the children's voices coming from outside where they were doing whatever it was they were doing, probably knowing Clara, something that involved tracking, and knowing Tom, something that involved taking a fence apart to see how it worked. The land was good. The life was good. It had been good, Opal thought, since before she knew it was going to be, since she had packed a saddlebag in Abilene with exactly what she needed and nothing more, and ridden south toward a thing her father had loved before her, carrying his faith in the land and her own faith in herself, which was the lightest kind of traveling there was. She had proved, in 340 miles of open country, that a woman could travel lighter than a man who said she could not. She had proved, In a decade of living on good land by a good river with a man who had followed her not because she needed him, but because he needed to, that traveling light had never been about what you left behind. It was about knowing what was worth carrying. And she had known, since the moment she turned her hand and let his fingers rest against her palm in the firelight of an old adobe way station in the rain, exactly what that was. On a September morning in 1892, exactly 10 years after she had ridden into Redemption with a saddlebag and a rifle and a direction, Opal Thatcher Donnelly stood on the south porch of her house on the Rio Grande and watched the morning come in over the mountains. The peach trees were heavy with their last late fruit. The river moved in its old way. The cottonwood stood in the early light. Nathan came out with 2 cups of coffee and handed her one and stood beside her, and the morning was quiet around them the way mornings are quiet on land that is used to being lived on. 10 years, she said. 10 years, he said. You followed me out of Redemption on the second day, she said. You pretended you were just going south. I was very transparent, he agreed. You were, she said. I did not mind. He looked at her sidelong. What would you have done if I had not followed? She considered the question honestly, which was the only way she did anything. Arrived at Las Cruces, she said. Established the claim, started building. She paused. Missed you. You would have missed me, he said. You had known me for one day. One very efficient day, she said. I had known you one very efficient day, and you had told me I was looking at the wrong route and then told me women needed more than I packed, and I had thought that you were infuriating and interesting in equal measure, and that I would very much like to continue the conversation. You did not say any of that, he said. I do not say everything I think immediately, she said. I am efficient, not reckless. He laughed, and the sound of it went out into the morning over the garden and the river, and Tom's window opened on the upper floor. He was 12 now, and he woke with his father's instinct for the noise of the people he loved, and a sleepy face appeared. What is funny? Tom called down. Everything, Nathan called back. Go back to sleep. Tom considered this assessment and apparently found it satisfactory because the window closed again. Clara's window, adjacent to Tom's, did not open. Clara slept with the absolute commitment of someone who had decided that sleep was worth doing properly. This, too, was her mother's quality, directed at a different end. Opal drank her coffee and looked at the morning. I am glad you followed, she said quietly. I am glad you let me, he said. The river moved south the way it always had. The cottonwood stood its ground the way it always had. The mountains in the distance were the same mountains they had always been, and they would be the same mountains long after the peach trees and the house and the garden and the 2 people on the porch had given back to the land what they had borrowed from it. But the morning was now. The coffee was hot. The children were sleeping in a house built from a deed and a direction, and a saddlebag packed for one that had somehow, over 340 miles of open country, become a life for 4. Opal Thatcher Donnelly had proven what she set out to prove, that she could travel lighter than the man who said she could not, and farther and truer, and that the destination she had packed toward was exactly worth every mile. And Nathan Donnelly, who had ridden out of Redemption with his gear and his long habit of moving and his well-meant wrong assumption, had arrived, finally and irrevocably, at the place he had been traveling toward for a decade without knowing the name of it. Home, which was here, which was this, which was her.